Okay, Valtic. So we learned on Friday. We started at the Gemara on Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. We started from the Mishnah that was talking about the halacha that after the tenufa is completed of the Zroya B'Shela of the Shlomim, at that point the Nazir becomes Ois Nazir, or he stays a Nazir with the Kedushas Nazir, but he's allowed to drink wine. And Reb Shimon said that you don't need to complete the full process. Any one of the karbanos for which the dam was already spritzed would allow the person to continue to start drinking wine and being mitamal mesim. It will release the prohibitions of a nazir. The Gemara brought a machlokes, the Tanakama, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Eliezer, if a nazir has to do the entire process in order to discharge and release him from the Isurei Nazir. And we would learn that from the pasuk of Va'achar Yishteh HaNazir Yayin, which the pasuk says, you do the Tnufa and you finish the Karbonis, and then Va'achar Yishteh HaNazir Yayin, Achar Kol HaMaisim, after the whole process is complete. That was Rabbi Eliezer. The Chum said one mice is enough because you learned it from another pasuk which is Achar, Hisgal Choyes Nizroi, which is only referring to one component. So we have Gzeir Shava Achar to tell us that just like the Achar Hisgal Choyes Nizroi is only one item, so too any item that's done as far as the process of discharging the Naziris will allow him to start drinking wine and being with Tamal Mason. I spoke out, I believe it was from the Al-Shich, analyzing the pasuk. Why does it say Va'achar Yishteh HaNazir Yayin? It should say Va'achar Yishteh HaIsh Yayin. He's not a Nazir anymore. So we learned that when someone is Mekabel Naziris, even though his Naziris is over, he's now on the higher Madrega. And he takes his Naziris with him, he takes the enhanced Kedusha with him. And I forgot to mention that on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol was toivel in between each of his begodim anytime he had a beggar change, which is understandable. He's preparing to do a new avodah. What's shver is after the last avodah that he does, when he changes out of his big day kahuna into his big day yochid, into his own clothing, he toiveled again. Why would he be toiveling after he finished all the avodah? Vayzdechosh, going home is also a chelik from the avodah, because going home is a time where he has to absorb and internalize the madregas and the kedusha that he gained on Yom Kippur. So that supports the same svara. So that was the machlokes between the Chacham and Rabbi Eliezer. If one ma'aseh is enough to discharge the prohibitions of Nazir, or if you have to do the whole process. Then we got into this complicated sugya, which wasn't so complicated at all. It's just that I didn't have clarity. So I'm going to learn it inside. It's simple and fast. Rav said, Tenufa b'Nazir ma'keves. Tenufa b'Nazir is ma'keves. So let's think, who would this follow, according to which shita it is? Aliba de man, Ilema aliba de Rabbanan. We had a machlokes between Rabbanan and Rabbi Eliezer, if you have to do all of the steps in order to discharge the Yisurim of Naziris, or only one step, only one item. So if it's going according to Rabbanan, Taglachas ami Rabbanan le ma'akva, Tenufa miboy, even taglachas is not ma'akiv. Only one, even one zrika is good enough. So how could you suggest that tnufa, which is never a chiyuv in any place where it's required, it will never be ma'akiv the carbon. So how could you suggest that tnufa is ma'akiv according to Rabbanan? Impossible. Ella, when Rav said that tnufa is ma'akiv, he must have been referring according to Rabbi Eliezer. Ella libid Rabbi Eliezer. Frank Gemara Pshita ha'amar Rabbi Eliezer achar ma'asim kulam. Rabbi Eliezer made it very clear. You have to do the whole process in order to discharge the Naziris. Zok Gemara, Rav still felt it was important to stress that that also applies to the Tnufa as well. Since Lagabe Kapara it's called Shiori Mitzvah, which Toshvus tells us, the Gemara uses it when it's discussing Tnufa, and it tells us that Tnufa is not Ma'akiv, Hachanami Lois Akiv. So here, by Naziris as well, it shouldn't be Ma'akiv. Kamash Malon, when Rabbi Eliezer said Achar Kol Havodos, he meant everything, including the Tnufa, is mandatory. Okay, that's Very straightforward. Now we're going to get into the part of the Gemara. It's a little bit more complex, although not too complex. Frankly, Rav said that according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Tnufa is ma'akiv. I'm going to prove to you that according to Rabbi Eliezer, even according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Tnufa is not ma'akiv. Why? Because of a brisa. It says in the brisa, Zois Teiras HaNazir. From these words we learn a chiddush. What is the chiddush that we learn? Bein sheyesh lo kapayim, bein she'ein lo kapayim. Whether or not the Nazir has hands or not. So what does that mean? So the pashtus of how the Gemara understands this brisa is that yesh lo kapayim is just like ein lo kapayim. If someone doesn't have kapayim, he cannot possibly do tnufa. So we learn from ein lo kapayim that just like someone who's ein lo kapayim can't do tnufa and it's still going to discharge his naziris, so too by yesh lo kapayim. So we're going to call the ein lo kapayim the source, and the yesh lo kapayim we're going to call the derivative. We learn yesh lo kapayim from ein lo kapayim. The chiddush of Zois Teiras HaNazir is to tell us that just like if someone didn't have kapayim, he cannot do tnufa, yet it will still discharge his naziris. So too, even if you have kapayim and you're able to do a tnufa, if you didn't do the tnufa, it will still discharge your naziris. So, Frank the Gemara, how could you say that Rav says according to Rabbi Eliezer that the tnufa is ma'akiv? This brisa says it's not ma'akiv. So you might ask, who said this brisa is Rabbi Eliezer? Maybe this brisa is going according to the Rabbanon. For that, the Rishonim tell us, according to the Rabbanon, they learn from the Gzer Shava of Achar that no individual avoid is required. Any one is enough. So I don't need Zois Teiras HaNazir to teach me that specifically by Tnufa. So Zois Teiras HaNazir, the Balt, it's required this special pasuk to tell you that Tnufa is not ma'akiv. It must be going according to Rabbi Eliezer, because according to the Rabbanon, nothing is ma'akiv. So now we have a kasha. You see from this brisa, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that Tnufa is not ma'akiv. Zok the Gemara, if that's your approach to understanding this structure, when it says bein sheyesh lo, bein she'ein lo, that the she'ein lo is the source and the sheyesh lo is the derivative, and therefore you're going to say that even if someone has kapayim, he's not mechuyev in tnufa. Let's see how well that fits in to another brisa that uses the exact same words. Sorry? That's right. That's right. It is mechuyev. I'm sorry. You're mechuyev. It's not maka. Very, very important distinction. Ve'ela ha the Tanya Zois Teiras HaNazir. We use the same pasuk to teach us another thing. Bein sheyesh lo sar, bein she'ein lo sar. So let's think. Based on this, the ein lo sar is the source. The yesh lo sar is the derivative. So you're going to say, just like someone who doesn't have sar cannot do the giluach, and therefore it would still discharge the naziris. It won't be ma'akiv. So too, ben sheyesh lo sar does not have to do the taglachas. Can you possibly say that anybody would hold that you don't need to do taglachas? Hachanami deloy ma'akva. I'm going to show you that about it is ma'akiv. That's right. But Tanya, we learned Nazir memurat. If a Nazir is bald, he doesn't have to use the tar. If he doesn't have sar, he doesn't use the tar. Not to be confused. But let's focus on Beis Hillel. He does have to pass the razor over his head. So let's think about this. Let's go back. Zois Teiras HaNazir, bein sheyesh lo sar, bein she'ein lo sar. If bein she'ein lo sar is the source, well, there you have to be maver tar al roishay, and therefore bein sheyesh lo sar, you also have to be maver sar al roishay. So clearly it's saying that it is ma'akiv. Just like ein lo sar, it's ma'akiv. You need to do the havaras tar. So too by the bein sheyesh lo, it's ma'akiv. So you see clearly that it is ma'akiv. So Vatanya Nazir memurat beishami yomim ein tzarich lahaver tar al roishay. And Ravina said, "My einay tzarich levei Shammai." When it says einay tzarich, according to Beis Shammai, what does it mean? It means einay tzarich and ein loy takana. Hol Beis Hillel, according to Beis Hillel, which we're going to focus on, it's yesh loy takana. Why? Because he could he could run the tar on his head. So therefore, you can't say bein sheyesh loy sar, bein she'ein loy sar means that the ein loy is the source and the sheyesh loy is the derivative. Because adarabah, we're learning that just like if he has sar, he's mechuyev to do a taglachas, so too if he doesn't have sar, he also has to do the motions of a taglachas. You can't learn it the opposite way, that bein she'ein loy sar, that he doesn't need to do a taglachas. Because in fact, he does need to do a taglachas. So you see that you can't learn it that way. You have to learn it that bein sheyesh lo is the source and bein she'ein lo is the derivative. So therefore, going back here, bein sheyesh lo is the source, meaning where you would have to do tnufa. Bein she'ein lo kapayim is the derivative that you have to do tnufa. So in fact, don't tell me from here a raya that the tnufa is not makiv. In fact, if you look at the same loshen in reference to sar, it clearly shows that you do have to do it and it is makiv. However, once Ravina says that yesh lo takana v'hanu rapadas, the Amr rapadas Beishamai, Rabbi Eliezer, Amru Dover Echad, Beishamai and Rabbi Eliezer say the same halacha. What is that same halacha? My Rabbi Eliezer. Now we know what Beishamai says. He needs to be maver atar, but it doesn't work. He needs the giluach, but he can't do a giluach. So he's out of luck. He's not able to discharge his naziris. That's what Beishamai would hold. Rav Das said that Beishamai Shita is similar to Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer is also going to find the case where something was required, the person is not able to do it, and because of that, he's stuck. And that's a case of Mitzayr. During the Tahiris HaMitzayr, he has to spritz blood on his thumb and on his big toe. We call those the gout Evarim. The Tanya, Ein loy boyhen yad v'regel. What if he doesn't have them? Ein loy tahira ilamis. There's no way for a Mitzayr to become Torah. Div Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon Omer yanichenu al makayim v'yotza. You know what you do? He doesn't have a thumb, so they would have to put it, on the hand or the closest place to the thumb. So it's similar to what Basil says, that you're maver atar anyway. But there are those who say you don't have a raya either way. The Rush speaks out, now you don't have a raya either way. You don't have a raya that giluach, or that you don't have a raya that tenufa is makiv, nor do you have a raya that tenufa is not makiv, because maybe the whole limud of yesh loy to ein loy is saying, just like yesh loy, you have to do the tenufa. Hu adin ein loy, you do the tenufa, and the chiddush is that you could do the tenufa with whatever is there instead of his hand. And the chiddush will be exactly what Basil taught us, that sure, by sar, there's no hair, so how could you do it? You do the motions. You do what you can do. Maybe that's the chiddush. Maybe that's what the Bryce is telling us, both by yesh lo sar, bein she'ein lo sar, and by bein sheyesh lo kapayim, bein she'ein lo kapayim. Maybe all it means to tell us is, if one doesn't have the aver required to do the mitzvah, he can use the next available aver. So therefore, you wouldn't have a raya not to say that tenufa is ma'akiv, and not to say that tenufa is not ma'akiv. That was the first approach to the Gemara. And then the Gemara quotes another lashon which approaches the same sugya from the opposite and the absolutely opposite perspective, and understands the brises exactly the opposite of the way that the Gemara understood the brises in the first lashon. So let's tackle it. Lishnachrina, Amri la Amar Rava. The Bach changes it to Rava. Tenufa b'nazir ma'akeves. Exactly the same thing that we quoted from Rav in the first lashon. And we're going to go through the same shackle of attires before, identical. I'll tell you when this lashon breaks from the first lashon. So far, we're identical to the first lashon. Aliba de man, are we saying that tenufa is makeves? Ilema aliba de Rabbi Eliezer, pshita. According to Rabbi Eliezer, it's pshita. Ha'am Rabbi Eliezer, acher ma'asim kulam. Rabbi Eliezer said that everything is ma'akev. Ela aliba de Rabbanon, you want to say it's going according to Rabbanon that only one thing is ma'akev? Hashtu yishloim taglachas ami Rabbanon loy ma'akva tenufa mivoy. So it must be, of course, we are going to have to fill in the Gemara's comment. So it must be that this comment that Rav said, or that Rava said, that Tenufa's Ma'akev is going according to Rabbi Eliezer. It's Pshita according to Rabbi Eliezer. We'll have to explain it like we explained it before. I would have thought that since Tenufa anywhere else in the Torah is not Ma'akev, so by Nazir, it shouldn't either be Ma'akev, and it should be an exception to the rule of Acher Ma'isam Kulam, Kamash V'lon Rav or Rava, that according to Rabbi Eliezer, Tenufa by Nazir is Ma'akev. Now the Gemara asks, not umima akva, like it asked before. How could you say according to Rabbi Eliezer it's ma'akiv? Now we're asking the kasha on the Rabbanon. Umi loy ma'akva. You Rabbanon hold even one mice is enough, meaning tenufa wouldn't be required. Is that possible? I'm going to bring you a raya that the Rabbanon hold that even though no avoidance or ma'akiv, tenufa is yama'akiv. Where did you see that? From the same brisa that we quoted before to prove that tenufa is not ma'akiv, we're going to understand the brisa differently, and this time the brisa is going to tell us exactly the opposite. That tenufa is ma'akiv. But Tanya Yosy Simon Nazir Daf. And the way the brisa is understood now by the Gemara is, again, the source is ein loy kapayim, and the derivative is yesh loy kapayim. That's the same, but what you learn from the source is different. Bein ein loy kapayim, not like what we said before. Ein loy kapayim would be potter. Fakert ein loy kapayim would be ma'akiv. You know why? Because there's a concept of kol haroyu lebila bila ma'akeves, v'chol she'ein kol haroyu lebila ein bila ma'akeves, v'chol she'ein royu lebila bila ma'akeves. There's a halacha when you're mixing the flour and the oil for a mincha. There's only a certain amount, a certain size amount of flour that you can mix with the measure of oil, because once it gets too big, it's impossible to mix it properly. So the Gemara asks, what's the big deal if it's impossible to mix properly? Anyway, even when you have the regular shiurim, you're not mechuyev to mix it at all. So the Gemara, you're right. But kol haroyu lebila ein bila ma'akeves. If you have the right proportions of oil to flour that it could be mixed, that's enough. It doesn't have to actually be mixed. But to put it into proportions where it's impossible to mix, that wouldn't be good. So here too, if you have hands, you might say that you don't have to make tenufa. But if someone doesn't have hands, so he's not even right to do tenufa, there for sure it would be ma'akiv. So what the pasuk is saying is normally you would say kol haroyu lebila ein bila ma'akeves. So somebody who has hands could do tenufa, doesn't have to do tenufa. But from Zois Torah and Nazir, these extra words, the Torah is teaching us that don't follow the normal rules. Rather, ben shein lekapayim, if someone does not have hands, he's not right to do tenufa. Therefore, tenufa will be ma'akiv. Apply that as well to even somebody who has hands. Ben sheyesh lekapayim, even if someone does have hands, the tenufa should be ma'akiv. Now, once again, we have that same question. How do you know this is the Rabbanon? Maybe this is Rabbi Eliezer. The Torah is according to Rabbi Eliezer. I know that the tenufa is ma'akiv without the pasuk of Zois Torah and Nazir. He has the pasuk of Achar Kol HaMa'asim Kula. So therefore, we're making an assumption that this brisa is going according to the Rabbanon. Again, exactly the opposite of what we said before. And we're learning the brisa differently. Bein shein loy kapayim tells me that without kapayim, it is ma'akiv. And therefore, that should apply to bein sheyesh loy kapayim, even if he has hands, tenufa will be ma'akiv. So we have a kasha. How could you say that they're button hold? Tenufa is not ma'akiv. From this brisa, we see it is ma'akiv. Zok to Gemara. Tanya. Let's see if we could learn it that way in a similar brisa that uses a similar term. Zois Torah hanazir bein sheyesh loy sar bein she'ein loy sar. Hachanami, are you going to say the same thing? The ma'akva? Are you going to say that ein loy sar means it's not royal lebila, and therefore it's ma'akiv, and you'll apply the same thing to yesh loy sar, that you have to do the cutting? I'll show you it's impossible to learn the brisa this way, because vatanya nazir memurat ve'shamay oimrim ein tzorich lavir tar al roishoy u'v'sil oimrim tzorich. V'sil tells you have to just run it over a set. So kum techayis, even someone who doesn't have sar is royal lebila. Why is he royal lebila? Because you could still do the taglachas by doing the motions of running the razor over a set. So it's impossible to learn that now this is the source to the bein sheyesh loy sar that's ma'akiv. Adrabah, what you can have to say is bein sheyesh loy sar, just like if someone has sar, he is mechuyev to do the taglachas, and therefore ubein she'ein loy sar, and so too someone who doesn't have sar has to do the motions of the taglachas by putting the tar over a set, which will translate into the first brisa, bein sheyesh loy kapayim. If somebody has hands, he should do the tenufa. Ubein she'ein loy kapayim. If he doesn't have hands, he doesn't do the tenufa. So therefore, you don't have a raya anymore from this brisa that tenufa would be ma'akiv. Zok to Gemara, that's not a good teretz, because Amar Rabavina might tzarich levesilil tzarich ve'en lo takana. So here we have Rabavina who's learning exactly the opposite of what we said before. It's Beis Hillel who says that he has to do taglachas when he's bald and he's unable to. And therefore, according to Beis Hillel, in fact, it's not royal labila. We would be able to learn this brisa, ben she'en lo sar, and therefore the taglachas is ma'akiv, and ben she'yesh lo sar will taglachas will be ma'akiv, which we could do the same thing with the earlier brisa. Ben she'en lo kapayim, and it's ein royal tnufa, so tnufa is makeves, ben she'yesh lo kapayim, tnufa will be ma'akiv. So at the final point of the Gemara here, we're actually ending with a kasha on the Rabbanon. How could you say the Rabbanon say Tanufa is not mandatory? From this brisa, which we argue should be going according to the Rabbanon, it seems like Tanufa is mandatory. Now we've learned the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel the opposite fashion. Earlier we said that it's Beis Shammai who says Ein Lo Takana, and Beis Hillel holds Yesh Lo Takana. But in this part we're saying Beis Hillel holds Ein Lo Takana, Tzarich, but the Ein Lo Takana. Hol Beis Shammai Yesh Lo Takana. Because Rav Padas learned in Beis Shammai Ein Lo Takana, and that's why he said Beis Shammai and Rabbi Eliezer by Mitzayra both hold the same thing, that you have to do the avoda, you're not able to Ein Lo Takana. But the way we're learning now, Beis Shammai holds over here by Naziris Yesh Lo Takana, and therefore it would not be consistent with Rabbi Eliezer, and that would not agree with how Rav Padas learned the sugya. So this is a Pashup shot in the Gemara that I apologize I didn't explain properly on Erev Shabbos, but now it's pretty straightforward. Just to summarize everything, is we have a shita of Rabbi Eliezer who holds that you need to do all the avodas, and as Rav and Rabbi said, including the tnufa. According to Rabbanan, any one avoda will discharge an Naziris, and you don't have to do tnufa. And the Gemara in one lashon proposed a kasha against Rabbi Eliezer and tried to prove that Rabbi Eliezer holds that tnufa is not required, but the Gemara deflected that kasha. And the Gemara on the second lashon posed a kasha to the Rabbanon to prove that the Rabbanon would hold, in fact, that Tanufa is ma'akiv, and the Gemara seemed not to have resolved that kasha and remained with the kasha on the Rabbanon. That's sugya. Then we learned on Erev Shabbos about Gilach al Zevach. I'll read it through very quickly. Gilach al Zevach when Nimta Apostle, he did his job. He brought one of the karbanos, and he took his haircut after he brought one of the karbanos. But it turned out the Zevach was pasul, and the type of psul we're talking about is not pigel. It's a type of psul which is shaloi l'shma, which would not pasul the carbon. Rather, it would just say that he doesn't get credited his chiyuv to bring the carbon. So let's say it was the oila or the shlomim. If he had wrong kavana, the oila is still kosher, the shlom is still kosher, but he doesn't get credited for it. He'll have to bring another one. So the halacha is taglachasoi psula. His taglachas is pasul because his carbon was not credited to him. He didn't make his taglachas after one of the karbanos that he was mandated to bring. And therefore, since his taglachas is pasul, any other karbanos that he would have brought would be pasul too, because he didn't have a taglachas. What happens if it was gilach alachata shaloi l'shma? If he was megalech on the chata shaloi l'shma, the achar chevik karbonoisav l'shman, and the rest of the karbanos were brought l'shman, taglachasoi psula, because his taglachas was on the carbon chatos, and the carbon chatos shaloi l'shma is possible. But gilach ala oila oila shlamim shaloi l'shman, the achar chevik karbonoisav l'shman, taglachasoi psula, which is Tanakama Shita, but Reb Shimon Omer, if it was a shlamim or an oil that was brought shaloi l'shman, since they're kosher karbanos, even though they're not credited to this nazir, it's good enough to validate his giluach. And therefore, because he made his giluach properly, and the other karbanos that he brought were brought l'shma, so all we'll have to do is make up the first zebach that was done shaloi l'shma. What happens when gilach al shloshton? They brought all three karbanos, and only then did he cut his hair. And even one of them was kosher, other two were pasul. That's good enough. Because as long as one is kosher, his giluach will be kosher. Amar Rav Adar bar Ava, Zoyse Meretz Kosavar Rab Shimon Nazir Shegilach al Shalmei Nedava Yotze. If a nazir was megaleach on Shalman Nedava. It was a standard shlomim, a generic shlomim. It wasn't even part of his shlomim of Naziris. Yotza. Because that's exactly what happened in this case. In the Mishnah, where when it was brought Shlo Shema, Rab Shimon says that the Geluach is good. Where do you get that from? How do you know the Nazir doesn't have to be Megaleach on one of his specific Karbanos? My time with Amakra, V'natzan ala Eish asher tachas zevach hashlomim, the shlomim, v'loy ksiv, v'loy kasav, shlomah. It doesn't say his shlomim, it says any shlomim. And therefore, according to Reb Shimon, as long as the carbon was a kosher carbon, his Geluach is valid, but the Tanakama argues. Next Mishnah. Misha Nizr Kalov. Echad ben Adamim. So he brought one carbon and he was free and clear. V'nitman, he became Tameh. So we already know that Rebbe Eliezer holds, even before he brought any karbonis, if on day 31, after he had already completed the 30 days of his Naziris, on day 31 he became Tameh, even before any karbonis, he's not soiser any part of his Naziris. Now, since he's Tameh, he can't bring karbonis, so he has to wait 7 days to bring his karbonis. So here Rebbe Eliezer says soiser es hakoil. It's soiser everything. The Gemara is going to bring up what I just said and tell us that it doesn't mean it's soiser the Naziris. It means it prevents him from all the karbonis. So the carbon that he brought will be puzzle, and he's not going to be able to bring any more karbonis until he's metahar himself. No, Yavi Shar Karbonisov V'yitar. And David didn't like how the Gemara presents it, because it really means V'yitar. Let him wait until the end of 7 days, and then he can bring the next two karbonis. So the first carbon that he brought will be kosher. And at the end of 7 days, when he's Torah, he can resume the next two karbonis that he still needs to bring. Amr Loi, the Rabbanan wanted to bring a raya to Rabbi Eliezer that's exactly the case, that he doesn't lose the carbon that he had already brought. So she wanted to be with her daughter in her last moments, and then she found that she had died, meaning she became tamei. So exactly the case of the Mishnah. She brought one carbon, and then she became tamei. Let her wait 7 days to be matar, and she could bring her other karbanos. We learned Rabbi Eliezer called Achar Malois Shiva Soiser. Didn't Rabbi Eliezer say that never Soiser, the Naziris, you just have to wait 7 days to bring your karbanos b'tahira? Amarav Einechanami, my Soiser Nami Dekama Rabbi Eliezer Soiser Karbonoisov. Our Mishnah is only discussing karbanos. Our Mishnah is not addressing at all the Naziris. The Naziris is untouched because he's already completed counting all of his 30 days b'tahira. Hachanami mistavra. If you look at the words of the Mishnah, it'll become evident that that's all we're discussing. The Katani v'Chachamim Oimrim, the Chachamim said, Yovi Shar Karbonoisav V'yitar. So you see, the dispute that the Chachamim had is only about the karbonos. Shema Mino. And again, from the story brought, it illustrates the same thing. Once again, the discussion is only about the karbonos. No one is discussing if this tumah impacted for Naziris itself. Shema Mina. Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish the 6th parak. Now we're going to start a new sugya. It's very simple and easy. Kohen Gadol v'Nazir. If someone's either a Kohen Gadol or someone's a Nazir, one or the other, ein mitamen l'kreiveyin. They cannot even be mitamen to their relatives, not to their mother, not to their father, not to their son, not to their daughter, not to their sister, not to their brother, and not even to their wife. They cannot be mitamen to anybody. Avo mitamen l'meis mitzvah. They can be mitamen to a meis mitzvah. Toshus is going to tell us that we're not gurish this line, not because it's not true, but because the Gemara is going to be medaik from the Mishnah. They can't be metamet to their koivin. They could be metamet to a meis mitzvah. Why would the Gemara be medaik that from the Mishnah if it's black and white in the Mishnah? So because of that, Tosha says we're not going to be gurish this line. What happened if this Kohen Gadol was walking together with a Nazir and they bump into a meis mitzvah, a motzah meis mitzvah? Who should be the one to be metamet? Is it better for the Kohen Gadol to be metamet, or is it better for the Nazir to be metamet? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yitma Kohen Gadol, let the Kohen Gadol be Tamei, Va'al Yitma Nazir. The Nazir shouldn't become Tamei. The Chachamim Omer exactly the opposite. Yitma Nazir, Va'al Yitma Kohen Hedid. The Kol Shekain Kohen Gadol is what the Gerusha tells us. Amar Lahem Rabbi Eliezer, let me tell you why Yitma Kohen. You know why? She'enei maybe carbon altamosai. If a kohen becomes tamei, he doesn't have to bring a carbon to fix that. So it's less severe. So the person that should become tamei is the one who is going to be over the less severe isser. Yitami nazir shu maybe carbon altamosai. A nazir, it's a big deal if he becomes tamei. He has to bring a carbon. Better he shouldn't be metama to the meis mitzvah. Amuloi, the Chacham told him, we disagree. Yitma nazir, let the nazir become tamei. She'ein kedushas kedushas olam. The nazir is only kaddish for a limited amount of time, typically 30 days. While yitama kohen shekedushas kedushas olam, a kohen shouldn't be metama because his kedusha is forever. So those who ask, what about Nazir Shimshon? What if someone who's makabel Nazir his whole life? Tosfos says it doesn't matter. Since Naziris in general could be limited, so Naziris as a whole, as a category, is not as chomer as kahanis, which is forever. Zok the Gemara. Bishlama kohen gadol v'nazir. We have a machlokes who should be metama between the kohen gadol and the nazir. High sover kohen gadol adif, high sover nazir adif. But what would happen if it was two kohen gadols, but one was a meshuach b'shem and a mishcha, and the other one was only a meruba begadim? And Tosfos tells us that the real way to anoint a kohen gadol is with oil. There was a special shemen hamishcha that was made. But before the Churban, King Yoshio hid away many of the treasures of the Beis HaMikdash, and amongst them was the shemen hamishcha he hid away. So any kohen gadol after that was not meshuach b'shemen hamishcha. So the only thing that differentiated between him and all other kohanim was the fact that he wore 8 begadim instead of 4 begadim. So what if you have a meshuach b'shemen hamishcha and a meruba begadim? They're walking along and they bump into a mace. Who should be metama? So we're going to have to first understand if there is oil around. So then, how come the second guy is only a meruba begadim? So we're going to have to work out exactly the logistics of how that happens. But let's first see what the halacha is. Zok the Gemara, the halacha is meshuach b'shemen hamishcha adif. The person is meshuach b'shemen hamishcha adif. So you might say, of course, he has more kedusha. The Gemara's language is only if there's a halachic difference, if there's a halachic chumrah. Zok the Gemara, there is a halachic chumrah. Dilu meshuach b'shemen hamishcha. If a kohen gadol who's meshuach b'shemen hamishcha paskins for himself about an iser kares that it's mutter, and then he violates it, thinking that it's mutter, everybody else would bring a regular carbon chatas. The kohen hameshuach, there's a special pasuk in the Torah to tell us that he brings a par, maybe par haba al kol mitzvahs. But a kohen who's a meruba begadim, even though he's a kohen gadol, the Torah, when it talks about this par, specifically says it's only for a kohen hameshuach. So if he wasn't zoichet to be nimshach with the shemen hamishcha, then he's like anybody else, and he just brings a regular carbon chatas. The meruba begadim and maybe does not bring. So therefore, since the meshuach with shemen hamishcha is a higher level of kedusha, if there's a question who should be metama, it's only going to be the meruba begadim. So Tosfos shares with us some interesting history on how this shemen hamishcha worked. So I'm going to start from the Tosfos, the fourth wide line. Very easy Tosfos. V'chein meshuach b'shemen hamishcha, kohen gadol shenimshach b'shemen hamishcha. U'meruba begadim kari. Why is he called a meruba begadim? Mishenigna shemen hamishcha. Once the shemen hamishcha was hidden away, who did that? The Yoshio gana shemen hamishcha shasa Moshe. So Moshe made the shemen hamishcha. Yoshio hid it away. I believe he hid away the Aron as well. Kedisa the perkatzioloi. The acharav, and after that period of time, the kohanim were never meshuach because there was no shemen hamishcha there. Ela meruba begadim v'loi shemen. There was meruba begadim without shemen. So if I'm not mistaken, I read an article this week about the inauguration of King Charles. That they have a special type of oil that they rub him with. I wonder where those goyim got that idea from. So malim yodav beches begadim. How were they mamal the hands of the kohen gadol? They didn't have shemen hamishcha just by giving him the 8 begadim. They couldn't make. What's the big deal? To have the recipe, just make more. Yoshio could have hidden it away. Just make more. You can't do that. Shemen mishchas kodesh yiyezeh li l'dayrei seichem zeh v'lo yacher. The only valid shemen hamishcha was that Moshe Rabbeinu made, It was never duplicated. It was never added to. They only had that original amount, and they never added to it. So you would wonder, why wouldn't they have run out? They only made approximately a gallon and a half of it. The Gemara asks, was only one nice b'shemen hamishcha? The shemen hamishcha was a miraculous type of oil. There was only about 12 lug. 12 lug is about the volume of 48 eggs. So I would say that's maybe a gallon, maybe 2 gallons. Uboy, with that small amount of oil, nimshach hamishkan, v'chol keilav, v'aharon, ubanov, kol zayin yimei amaluim, uboy nimshachu kohanim gedolim umalochem. That's a lot of mishicha. You would expect that you would have used up that oil. Nevertheless, v'kuloi kayim losad lavoi. Losad lavoi, when we eventually get that shemen hamishcha back, the full amount will still be intact. Shenemar mishchas kodesh yeh zeli l'dayreseichem. It will last forever. Similar to our children, how they perceive our supply of money, that it's never ending. Tati can buy me anything. And our son-in-law is kol shekin v'kol shekin. V'ha damrinan hasam. That's what the Gemara tells us. Hamafatim Hashem lilmud boy oy l'moshe l'tzibur potter. What do you mean Moshe l'tzibur? I thought we don't make anymore. Zok the Gemara. Oh, I realized I couldn't hear anybody because my speaker was off. So now my speaker is on. If anyone was trying to say something before, I apologize. I definitely didn't ignore you. It's just my speaker wasn't on.
It's the same oil that was by Eli and Dalmona. He said,
It must have had that property. That's right. What do you mean L'Moshe L'Tzibur? We said that you can't make anymore. Zakimor either means Hainu b'mei Moshe, im also potter. Means b'mei Moshe. Then, if someone made it, because then they were allowed to add to it, he would be potter. Inami L'Moshe L'Tzibur L'Lamdom sheyedu la'asoisoi v'lo shimshchu mimenu. Even nowadays, if someone made it, L'Moshe L'Tzibur doesn't mean they're actually going to use it. It just means they'll learn how to make it. So nowadays, that Yoshio has already hidden away the oil, that's all you had. And he's a good kohen gadol, even though he didn't have the oil spritzed on him, the ton smeared on him. The ton rabban perkamet Megillah, Mashiach ainli ela b'shemen hamishcha, meruba begadim minalan tamid hakoyin hamashiach. The hashta Mashuach and meruba begadim mishkachas la. What would be the case of Mashuach and meruba begadim? How could they both be in the same generation? How do you have Medar Echad? Nimshach Echad leKohen Gadol. Someone was Nimshach to be a Kohen Gadol. See, the reason why you can't have them both generations, because normally, how do you replace a Kohen Gadol? When the early one dies. So how is it that you had two Kohanim Gedolim alive at the same time? If the earlier one was still around, why would there be a second one? So you could say it's Kohen Nimshach Echad leKohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol was Nimshach. It was Soiv Kach Nigna Shemen Hamishcha. And after he was appointed as Kohen Gadol, the Shemen HaMishcha was put away. There's no more Shemen HaMishcha. And one Yom Kippur, the Irabai Keri B'Kohen HaMashiach. One Yom Kippur, he had Tumas Keri, so they had to provide a substitute Kohen Gadol. Uminu Achatachto. That person, they couldn't smear because the oil was gone. So therefore, he was only a Meruba Begadim, Lasas Avoida, B'Yoyim HaKippur. So let's stop here a second, because I believe we have to slide down to Tosfos later on. So we're going to come back here, but first there's a Tosfos later that belongs right here. So, and that is 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. So if we're talking about after Yom Kippur, you have this Kohen Gadol who is Meshuach, walking together with the person who substituted for Yom Kippur. If it's a day after Yom Kippur, he's not a Meruba Begadim. He's already a past Meruba Begadim, because he was only active on Yom Kippur. The next day, he's no longer active. The original Kohen Gadol is back in business. And if this story happened in Yom Kippurim, where you have the Meshuach and you have the Meruba Begodim who are there simultaneously, it's not relevant to bury a Meis Mitzvah on Yom Kippur. Because Vakfuras Meis Mitzvah, Loi Dachi Yom Tiv, V'cholskein Shabbos, V'yam HaKippurim. So where is it relevant that you can have a Mashuach together with a Meruba Begodim and have an issue of being Matama for a Meis, if you were not even Matama on Yom Kippur? It actually is on Yom Kippur, but they're not burying him because they're not allowed to bury him. If you have a mace that's rotting in the sun, you're allowed to move it. And that was a discussion, who should move it? Should the Meshuach move it, or should the Meruba Begodim move it? And of course, the Gemara says the Meruba Begodim should move the mace and not the Meshuach. But Haka Amar, the Meshuach B'Shemen is Adif, U'metame ha-Meruba Begodim Michamal Atzel. Let the Meruba Begodim do it and not the Meshuach. The Meshuach Adif. Why? The Maisi Par Haba Al Kol HaMitzvahs, which we discussed what that is. Okay, Gevaltik. They probably were walking, no, maybe after the Avodah today. No, after the Kohen Gadol went home on Yom Kippur, the Mara Kohen is when he went home. Right? The kosher freik toisvis. Dimkein havel lemeimar meshuach chazi lavoida umruba begodim loy chazi lavoida. It should have said that the difference is that the meshuach is chazi lavoida and the meruba begodim is not chazi lavoida. The rishon chazi lavodasai. Kiteka amar gabe meshuach shabar. When you're a loymar, you're going to Kohen Gadol gila. He went into Golus. Uminu achetachtav meruba begodim. Okay, we're going to leave this for now. So now we have the case of the difference between the Kohen Meshuach and the Kohen Meruba Begodim. It's speaking that it was on Yom Kippur, and the question was whether or not they could move a mace, relocate a mace that was in the sun. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. How about Meshuach Sha'avar u'Meruba Begodim? You have a Meshuach Sha'avar u'Meruba Begodim. Now, once again, we're going to have to figure out how is that possible. If he's a Meshuach Sha'avar, there's no such thing as a retired Kohen Gadol. The only way a Kohen Gadol retires is when he dies. So the question is, how do you have a Meshuach Sha'avar together with a Meruba Begodim? How is it possible that you have these two things to coexist? We're going to see in a second, but let's see the halacha. Meruba Begodim Adif, the Meruba Begodim is Adif. You know why? The Meruba Begodim Avar Avoida. He's doing Avoida actively. So he shouldn't be Matama. Be the Meshuach Sha'avar, a Kohen Meshuach Sha'avar who's no longer doing Avoida, La Bar Avoidahu, let him become Tamid. So let's have a look. How is it possible to have a Meruba Begodim simultaneously with a Meshuach Sha'avar? So let's look at Tosfos. It's the fourth line from the top. Meruba Begodim and Meshuach Sha'avar. L'chayr mashma. What would be the case? Meruba Begodim going to kvar nignas shemen hamishcha. It must be seeking where there's no more shemen hamishcha anymore. By a Kohen Gadol Meruba Begodim, and there was a Kohen Gadol who was appointed without shemen hamishcha. The year by Kerry, and he had Kerry on Yom Kippur, so they had to be mamana a replacement. Uminu achar tachtav, and they appointed somebody else. Umashchu, and this guy who they mamana, him, they smeared with the oil. The over Yom Kippurim, and Yom Kippur passed. The Shuva Rishon, Shumaruba Begodim Chazal Avodasai, and now the first one went back to the Avodah, and the guy who replaced him is the Meshuach Shavar. But the problem is, if there was no Shemin HaMishcha, and the first Kohen Gadol didn't have smearing, how in the world did they smear the Kohen Gadol that was replacing him? So that's Tosfos' discussion. The first, this is an impossible case. The how would it be possible that the later Kohen Gadol who replaced the first Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, they were Moishechim? If there was no oil to be Moishech the first Kohen Gadol, how in the world did they have oil to be Moishech the second Kohen Gadol? So that's not an option. Ella, Yesh Lefarish, this was the case. Going to Yeshkan Kohen Gadol Meshuach Virberkeri. There was a Kohen Gadol who was Meshuach. But there was still oil in his days, and on Yom Kippur he had Keri. And there was still oil. So what they did was Umoshchay Acher Tachta. And now the Skan Kohen Gadol, who's now going to fill in for the main Kohen Gadol today, they had to be Moishechim to make him into a Kohen Gadol. And he worked out one day. The day after Yom Kippur, the original Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh, and now he's Torah again. V'shuv HaMashuach HaRishon chazar l'avodah. V'avad kama shanim achar kain. And he was doing his avodah uneventful for many years. So you have the Mashuach who only worked for one day, he sha'avar, and you have the Mashuach who's active. And then what happened was, Umashuach Hasheni avar, so he's gone. Uvenkach nigna Shemen HaMishcha. And then the Shemen HaMishcha was nignas. So although these two kohanim had Mashiach, the next kohen won't be able to have Mashiach anymore. And what happened? V'zeh Mashuach Rishon, the original kohen gadol, shechazur l'avodah, who after that eventful Yom Kippur went back and took his job back, Gola im Yechanyahu. He was sent into exile with King Yechanya. So he's alive, but he's no longer around. And that's very significant that he's alive. Uminu achar tachtav meruba begadim. So let's see what happens. There was a Mashuach who stood in for him 3 years ago on Yom Kippur. Now he's not active. You have the original Kohen Gadol who's active, and he gets sent away. So now they need a replacement. Who would be the most logical replacement? Wouldn't it be the guy that was Mashuach who filled in for him that one day? Why in the world would they appoint a new Kohen Gadol at this point? Zok Tosfos, I'll tell you why. Aval Mashuach she'avar einoi mismane tachtav kol yimei chayav shel rishon. If the first Kohen Gadol died, yes, they would let the other Kohen Mashuach step in. But since this Kohen Gadol, who was embarrassed at Yom Kippur, and another Kohen Gadol took over for him, as long as he's alive, we're never going to let that Kohen Gadol take over completely. Af ki yotza begoyla, we would never let that Kohen Gadol take over, mishum eva. That would cause hatred. This Kohen Gadol is going into Golus, but he's still alive, and that fellow who took over for him when he had carried that day, that he can't handle. Therefore, they have to appoint a new Kohen Gadol, but for that new Kohen Gadol, they don't have oil anymore. You can't say it's speaking when the Mashuach died, because because then that Mashuach who replaced the Kohen Gadol for that one day a couple of years ago, he would become the Kohen Gadol, because there's no Eva anymore once he dies. So it must be Elagala. The original Kohen Gadol was sent into exile. Uminu meruba begadim tachtov, and they appointed only a meruba begadim. So now we have left these two kohanim. We have the Mashuach she'avar, he only worked one day, and we have the meruba begadim. Mashuach she'avar kodim meruba begadim bizman shadayin haya Shemen HaMishcha. When there was still Shemen HaMishcha, of course, a Mashuach comes from meruba begadim, but the hashda shneim hamaruba begadim v'Mashuach she'avar. Now we have these two people standing here. We have the meruba begadim, who's the active Kohen Gadol. We have the Mashuach she'avar, who's the non-active Kohen Gadol. So the halach is meruba begadim adif she'avar v'oida. The problem is the meruba begadim does avoid the Kohen Gadol, but the Mashuach doesn't do avoid. Okay, he doesn't do avoid the Kohen Gadol, but he could do regular avoid. Zok Tosfos, no. Meruba begadim adif she'avar avoida she'royu la'avoida. He can do avoid. V'ila Mashuach she'avar lav bar avoid, who cannot do any avoid, not even the avoid of a Kohen Hedjid. Kedamrim perakama de yuma. The Kohen Gadol ain't royu b'shem eva. He can't be a Kohen Gadol as long as the person he replaced is still alive. V'loy the Kohen Hedjid the malam bekodesh v'loy meridin. He can't be a Kohen Hedjid because he could only work with 8 begadim, and a Kohen Hedjid who works with 8 begadim is possible. So that is the case. You have a meruba begadim who's the active Kohen Gadol. You have the Mashuach she'avar who really only acted as a Kohen Gadol for one day. Who does the Tumah? The Mashuach she'avar. Why? Because he's not doing avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. What happens if you have 2 kohanim that cannot work? Avar machmas kiriyoi, v'avar machmas mumai. One kohen that cannot work because he had too much carry, and the other kohen that couldn't work because he got a mum. The halach is avar machmas kiriyoi adif. Why? Because tomorrow he'll be good again. Diluhai chazi la'avodah l'machar. He has to wait until he heals up, even if it's a mum ha'ivir. What about a Mashuach Milchama Uskan? So there were different Kohen Gadol. There was the main Kohen Gadol. We're not discussing him. Then there was a Kohen Gadol that was set up, and he was Mashuach just for the purposes of leading Klal Yisrael into war. The Sagan is the backup Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. Should the Kohen Gadol become Tamei, he's the one who's going to take over. So you have these two people. Neither one of them are the active Kohen Gadol. One is the backup Kohen Gadol, and one is the Kohen Gadol. We'll call him the ceremonial Kohen Gadol. He's leading Klal Yisrael into battle. Very good. Hi minayu adif. Zakimar Meshuch Muhammad adif. You know why? The Chazi Muhammad. Do you say that? He should not become Tamei because he's Chazi Muhammad. Oidil Muskan adif the Chazi Avoida. Tashma. We have a bride that speaks.
You had on Yom Kippur, they prepared always a second Kohen Gadol.
But that was the scan. That was the scan. So that was the question: is the scan, should he be the one to be metame, or should the Meshuach Muhammad be metame? So the Brisa tells us black and white: Ein bein Meshuach Muhammad l'skan elishim hoyim halchem b'derech umatu meis mitzvah. Who should become tame? Yitma Meshuach Muhammad or Yitma skan. Only the Meshuach Muhammad become tame, not the skan. But Tanya, we learned Meshuach Muhammad kodim l'skan. Didn't we learn that the Meshuach Muhammad is in front of the skan? So maybe he should not be metame. Amar Zutra, you know when the Meshuach Muhammad takes precedence over the skan? That's the linin hachayoisai. The halach is you have to make the Kohen Gadol rich. You have to give him money. The people around him have to give him money to make him rich. Who is more important to enrich? The Meshuach Muhammad. Meshuach Muhammad adif. My timer. Why is the Meshuach Muhammad more important to make him rich? The Talubei Rabbim. Because the Rabbim rely upon him to lead them into war. So he's more important to be rich. But Inyan Tuma, but when it's a question of being metamas, the skan adif, the skan is better not to become tamei, rather let the Meshuach Muhammad become tamei. The Tanya Rabbi Chanina ben Antiknus Omer, Lama Tiknus skan lekohen gadol, Shem iru by psul, Hari nichnas mishamish tachtov. So we don't want him to become tamei. He needs to be standing at the ready at any moment to do the avoid. Gewaltig. Zog the Gemara. That's what it means, to save him? Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm sorry, Chaim is correcting me. Lachiyosha means to save him. Tosha says, Beferish, L'fakeich olav asagal. I forgot I'm a portion Tosha. If they're both in danger, they need to save the Kohen Meshuach Muhammad first, because he's needed to help Klal Yisrael go into Muhammad. Thank you for bringing it up, because it's a portion Tosha. Okay. Zog to Gemara. Akan loy pligi ela b'Kohen Gadol v'Nazir. The machlokes here is only when the Kohen Gadol and the Nazir come together, who should be metama? But kika azli b'had adon, when they're coming together. Aval chad l'chudei. But if a Kohen Gadol on his own encounters a meis mitzvah, or if a Nazir on his own encounters a meis mitzvah, bari temuyu eden. For sure, they have to become tamei. So this is what Tosha says. The Gemara seems to be making a diak. They're only arguing with who should go, that they're both there. But one at a time, for sure they're metama. Why make a diak? It's a meforsha mishnah. Zaktoisus were not going with that line in the Mishnah. But Lamaisa, how do you know that a Nazir, how do you know that a Kohen Gadol can be metama to a meis mitzvah? We know immediately. The Tanur Rabban, it says referring to a Kohen Gadol. Aleph is referring to a Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol may not become tamei to any mace. La'avivu le'imay lo yitam. The Tanur Rabbanan. It says, what type of mace is the Torah referring to when it says that a Kohen Gadol cannot be metame to a mace? If they're not related, it's a kal v'chomer from a Kohen Hedjit. Uma Kohen Hedjit, shu mitame lekroivim. Madach Kohen Hedjit, who may become tamei for his kroivim. Nevertheless, einay mitame l'rechoikim, he cannot become tamei for a stranger. Kohen Gadol. A Kohen Gadol who's not allowed to become tamei for kroivim. Surely he cannot become tamei l'rechoikim. So why do I need the pasuk of la'avav v'imay? I should know it from akol nafshish meis. Ela b'kroivim akasav medaber, must even be speaking by kroivim. Frek Tosfos, this kal v'chomer makes no sense at all. Let's go back to the kal v'chomer. Ma kohen hedjit shu mitame l'kroivim einam mitame l'rechoikim. Kohen Gadol she'enim mitame l'kroivim. How do you know that a Kohen Gadol is einim mitame l'kroivim? You first have to know that a Kohen Gadol is einim mitame l'kroivim. Only then can you say kol shekain he can't be mitame l'rechoikim. But you first have to know that a Kohen Gadol is not mitame l'kroivim. So you need la'aviv in the pasuk to tell you that even for a father you can't be mitame. So how could we say la'aviv is extra? In order to make this whole kal v'chomer, you need la'aviv. Zok Toysus, it's not really a kal v'chomer. The Gemara expresses it like a kal v'chomer, but it's not a kal v'chomer. What the Gemara is really saying is, a kohen gadol. How do we know that a kohen gadol cannot be metamal or rechokim? I don't need a kal v'chomer. A kohen gadol is also a kohen hedjit. So we altas kohen hedjit shaboy. We know he cannot be metamal to rechokim. So if the pasuk gives an enhanced restriction to the kohen gadol of al kol nafshes meis lo yavoy, it can't be the same prohibition that every kohen hedjit has, because we already know that the kohen gadol can't violate that. So al kol nafshes meis lo yavoy must be adding a new level of isser to apply even to his kroivim. So therefore, why does the pasuk have to speak out la'aviv u'le'imon? Zok the Gemara, that's the chiddush. La'aviv tells you a chiddush that la'aviv hu de'einu metameh. Only to his father he cannot be metameh. Ha-metameh hu l'meis mitzvah, but he could be metameh to a meis mitzvah. So this is the makar that a kohen gadol could be metameh to a meis mitzvah, and we're soon going to see how you know it from kohen gadol to nazir. Now it says in the pasuk la'aviv u'le'imon lo yitama. We know what we learned from la'aviv to tell you that to a meis mitzvah he can be metameh. Tomorrow we're going to learn what we learned from the word u'le'imon. So Baruch Hashem, we were able to do Mem Vav and Mem Zayin, and Baruch Hashem, it's geschmack and easy. And Be'ezer Hashem, we will continue tomorrow with Daf Mem Ches. Shkoyach everybody, and once again, I apologize for not being properly prepared on Friday and for plottering like a chicken turkey.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.